Thanks, Mimi, for the introduction. Yes, my name is Nas. You can call me Nas. I'm a youth, very young. And yeah, I'll be sharing some reflections from my time in Cali for COP16. So I think I've already been introduced, so I shan't introduce myself again. But more about my team. We are the Singapore chapter of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. So Gibbon, as it's called, is the official youth constituency under the United Nations for Convention on Biological Diversity, which was a sister convention to the UNFCCC, which we're all here to discuss today. So for us personally, we are a youth group in Singapore focused on biodiversity policy advocacy with a long-term goal of mainstreaming biodiversity. That is the integration of biodiversity into all levels and all sectors of public policy. So if it's not related to conservation, it's about engineering, it's about finance, it's about tech. Anything and everything under the sun should have nature-related considerations because it's all predicated on ecosystem services and biodiversity. So that leads into a quick introduction to the CBD. I'm guessing that most of the audience here is already quite familiar with the UNFCCC or the Climate Convention, but this is the sister convention, one of the 3 real conventions established in 1992. So we also have our own version of the Paris Agreement, which is called the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. KMGBF or GBF is fine. And it was instituted in 2022, 2 years ago. So this year's COP was meant to be the first touchstone since the KMGBF was adopted, and so its implementation was a core focus. So here are some highlights from the COP itself. You can see, I won't go into too much detail because I have limited time only, but indigenous people actually got a serious upgrade after the COP. Their rights were enshrined to participation in the COP at a very, very high level. Through the establishment of a permanent subsidiary body. The creation of the Kali Fund was one of the few finance successes. I'll talk about the failures later. One of the few successes that came out of the COP, with a lot of the funds being allocated to supporting indigenous peoples and local communities. Last but not least, in terms of successes, we have the alignment, the official alignment of biodiversity and climate policies between the UNFCCC and CBD respectively. For the failures, of course, this was very widely reported in the news, but we were unable to come to a consensus to establish the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund, or like a fund for funding conservation. Because of this, we were also unable to adopt the wide range of indicators required for the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework, which is why COP16 was widely reported to be a major loss, because as you remember, this is the main purpose of the COP16. So enough about all this information. You can find this online. My personal takeaways from the COP are a bit different. So just for context, I was there. I paid my own way there. And it was my intention to really observe and to learn at a very high level how negotiations can affect biodiversity policy on a very local level. Singapore is very, very proud of its stance in the UNFCCC. We have a huge Singapore pavilion, a huge delegation that goes out every single year, and we are at the forefront of climate policy. But for biodiversity policy and considerations, we're much weaker. So I want to be able to bridge that gap, and that's why I went to COP. So these are my personal takeaways. I think they can be best summarized in a series of 3 major divides. The first one comes as no surprise to most of you, I think. Between civil society and corporations, there generally is expected to be some siloing. But what I saw there was actually quite jarring. For the side events, civil society events were almost exclusively attended by their own crowd. And same thing for corporations. The 2 entities do not talk to each other. And so it's very clear in their messaging that, it's very one-note, one-dimensional, and their policy recommendations to the negotiators as a result lacked a lot of nuance. And I think a big reason for that actually stems from the second issue, which is the divide between biodiversity and climate. From my perspective as civil society, it's always been about a science-based approach that empowers local communities. And if you are here for the afternoon discussions today, I would say that the team here actually did a really, really good job curating the panel. I cannot say the same for the teams that were present at the COP, unfortunately. So If any of you were here for the biodiversity accounting session by Ash earlier, he brought up a lot of points in the biodiversity accounting framework that worked. Considering things like species richness, distribution, connectivity, all these metrics that go towards building a biodiversity accounting metric. But a lot of the biodiversity accounting that happened there was very simple, very rudimentary. It was things like using satellite data and only satellite data as a measurement for biodiversity value. So there's only so much information that you can glean from satellite images, but unfortunately that was the standard that was being pushed at COP. And in my opinion, that stems from this divide between biodiversity and climate. A lot of the corporate people and a lot of the consultants are coming in from the climate space, where, in my opinion, the accounting is much simpler. For carbon, you just need to measure how much carbon is being sequestered. But for biodiversity, there's a whole slew of metrics. So the temptation is very strong to resort to the simplest, quickest, easiest measure because we don't want to complicate reporting. We want to make it efficient. We want to make it cost less. But in the process of doing that, we sacrifice a lot of the detail that's necessary to ensure that ecosystems are properly quantified. And as a result, we have the last divide. Between values and action, there's also a major, major divide. Every single presentation at COP began with this huge, wonderful introduction about the value of biodiversity, about the huge funding gap, about the resources needed in order to ensure our long-term survival as a human race. But when it came time to action, when it came time for the implementation of a solution, the metrics that are suggested, the indicators that are suggested are very flawed and not very supported by science. And that's a problem because a lot of the consultants and corporates there, they are also lobbyists. They're also pushing for weaker legislation so that their products can get sold. A lot of the science-based methodologies and metrics that I saw today, they were not present there. And so they were not being actively lobbied for by the private sector. So if you take anything away, I am guessing that this audience has a mix of both audiences, civil society and corporates. Please, if you get a chance, go to COP and advocate for the best possible result for conservation. So I only had about 10 minutes to really just share my 2 weeks of agony with all of you. But it was a very long time. It was a longer flight back. It was 35 hours. And I had a lot of time to slowly marinate in the information. And I'm really, really happy to be able to share this with you. So if any one of you wants to reach out and have a deeper conversation on some of my personal takeaways on how biodiversity policy can help influence climate policy or support climate policy, I'm happy to have a conversation with you. Because at the end of the day, the ecosystems that are best able to support carbon sequestration are healthy functioning ecosystems. You need biodiversity to function effectively if you want to tackle the climate crisis. Thank you so much.
Okay, hi guys. So our team will be talking about tropical research in Brunei. So this will be in the tropical peatlands. So our team is SENSEM, and we are headed by Dr. Alex Cobb. And currently, we are a multidisciplinary team that's based in Singapore. We are specializing in tropical peatlands. So you might be asking, why conserve peatlands? So peatlands are commonly known as a huge carbon store. And this is because they store quite a lot of carbon compared to other ecosystems. How they achieve this is because they delay the decomposition process. So when trees fall, they don't just immediately decompose and release the carbon back into the atmosphere. Instead, they sequester it into the peat soil. So one of the other aspects of peatlands is that they have really high biodiversity and they play host to really rare species, such as the flat-headed cat, as you can see there, as well as the Sumatran tiger and the white-bellied tapir. So another lesser-known aspect about peatlands is actually the community benefits. So peatlands actually do render quite a lot of community benefits in this form of ecosystem services where they prevent flooding as well as carbon cycling. They also do provide essential resources such as timber and agriculture and fishing. So peatlands are currently under threat from deforestation as well as drainage. So this is especially concerning because when you drain and deforest these peatlands, they will degrade and then they release this stored carbon back into the atmosphere, thus exacerbating the climate change issue on hand. So this is a distribution of the peatlands. As you can see, the ones in the top part are mostly temperate peatlands, and the ones that we are focusing on is tropical peatlands in the middle portion. So exactly why tropical peatlands? Why not the temperate ones? That's a very good question. If you can see from the graph, you can actually see that tropical peatlands actually store more carbon compared to other ecosystems, and it can be up to 10 times more than other ecosystems. So this makes them really ideal for carbon offset credits as well as the carbon market. So, the next time you guys are thinking of which ecosystem to conserve, yeah, peatlands. That's your guide. So yes, so it's increasingly recognized right now that peatland conservation is really essential, and it's a critical part of nature-based climate solution. But the issue on hand is that you need a really good understanding of peatlands to be able to know how to conserve and to restore them. And the problem at hand right now is there is just less than 6.5% of natural peatlands left in Southeast Asia. So this makes it really critical for our research to be situated in a pristine site where it hasn't been degraded before, which is where Joshua would show you how difficult it is to get into the pristine site and the challenges that comes with it. So yes.
Okay, thank you, Raiyan. So I will be basically showing how tough it is getting to our project site. So our project site is located on the western end of Brunei at the border beside Miri, Malaysia. So there are basically no connectivity at all, and it basically takes about half day to reach our project site. So over here is a map of our 2 hours boat ride from the town Kuala Belait, and then you can basically very obviously see threads between the borders of Malaysia and in Brunei. So some of the major threats are deforestation from palm oil, from plantations, etc. And then over here is our 3 to a 5-hour hike. So that will take about 2.5 km. So and another interesting thing is that you can basically tell the micro topography of the trail. So from the beginning at the river, it's bluish, and then into the peatlands, it's more red. So that just shows you the micro topography of the peat dome. So for example, there are way more carbon stored in the middle of the peat dome. That's how the peat accumulates carbon. Yep. So getting into Mandaram. So on the left, it's our car ride kind of thing. So as you can tell, it's a very tough environment. It's a very tough trail. So it is extremely difficult to carry equipment, carry people as well. And yeah, I will be passing it back to Raiyan, who will be talking about life in the forest.
Oh yeah, so so obviously now that all that is done, when the boat ride and the track, that's actually the easy part, even though that takes 4 hours. Yeah, so this is when the tough part begins, where we have to carry the backpack and manually lug everything in through a 4-hour hike. So not fun, but kind of fun. So yeah, I would recommend everybody do it once. So yes. This is our current site, and on the left you can see that's the canopy level, and on the right that's that picture disappeared. But yeah, on the middle that's our instrumentation tower where we kit it out with all the sensors, and on the right side that's our canopy. That's above the canopy level, and you can see how the topography is really flat. I have a better picture. So yes, you can see how the whole landscape is really flat and it's really isolated. So it really makes you feel cut off from civilization at that point of time. So how's working in Mandaram? It's really interesting. So not all of it is research work, sometimes we have to do ad hoc stuff. We have to install stuff like solar panel to power our sensors. We have to cut a lot of metal sheets for flooring because we have to live in there. We can't just sleep on the floor. We are usually there for like 5 days in the forest. So what does all this hard work usually result in? We have managed to set up like a proper working platform that facilitates future research projects in this tower. We also have our tower solar panel set up. As you saw, we managed to hoist that whole 18 kg solar panel up, and that enables us to charge and power up all our sensors. So we also have our boom brackets set up, and with the help of Pierre, so that allows us to kit out the entire thing with our eddy covariance sensors. So this is the brief overview of the accomplished tasks that we have been doing so far. Oh, well, it seems like we did very little work, but trust me, there's a lot. So sorry about the technical issues. Oh, there, I did a lot of work. So yeah. So we were there for a total of 6 trips. So each trip, increasingly, we did a lot more stuff as we got more used to the difficulty of carrying the equipments in, as well as the length of stay that we were able to do at a single trip. So obviously, all this work, hard work, sweating in the forest, getting eaten alive by the mosquitoes, like at the end of the day, we got to retreat somewhere and be able to rest and sleep. So this is our 5-star resort. If you can see from the front, there's 2 barrels. That's our rainwater, our drinking water. And it's quite humble. I like it. So other than getting eaten alive by mosquitoes, we also have a pool to breed the mosquitoes in. No, it's just that's for our shower. So normally, this is the back of the house. We would go in there, we would grab buckets of water, and then we would bring it to this shower area on the right. And then we would just douse ourselves in cold water while getting eaten alive. So I would also really recommend that. So in conclusion, as Nasry said earlier, although it's really easy for you to just take satellite data of a site and say, hey, this place has a lot of vegetation, you don't really get a good resolution of it. Sometimes you just really have to muck it out and go into the field and collect the data on site. So, while it is really tough and it's not easy, it is actually really necessary. So, yeah. And also on the bright side, although the work is really tough, sometimes you might make one friend, sometimes you might make many. So yeah, thank you guys.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being with us tonight. Before I invite the panelists on stage, I just want to thank again Nas, Joshua, Raiyan for showing us the behind the scene of very important work, either at the COP or in the forest. And that was also a very good celebration of biodiversity, and I think that's something we should also do tonight, because we are all together concerned by one of the biggest threat that we're facing. So I'm going to give a short briefing on why we are organizing this panel discussion tonight, and then I'm going to introduce the speakers very shortly, because they're also going to introduce themselves, which will make my job easier. Last week, the Global Carbon Project, which is a consortium of scientists, they released their annual report revealing an inconvenient truth. 2024 holds the record of the highest greenhouse gas emissions in human history again. The rise persists despite the Paris Agreement, the boom in renewable energy, the pledge to transition away from fossil fuels that was agreed 1 year ago, and also the fact that Formula One is becoming carbon neutral. But releasing carbon to the atmosphere is only the beginning of the story. There is one part that remains in the atmosphere, and that's what's creating climate change. But there's about 50% that's being reabsorbed by nature, mainly the ocean, and what we call the land sink or ecosystems. And this is despite the fact that they are being affected directly by climate change. But this natural carbon dioxide removal is just an illustration of how important nature is to help us mitigate and adapt from climate change. As a result, nature-based solutions has become a very popular term, but sometimes misused or abused. They are concerned about the legitimacy and the legacy of those projects. But this is also perhaps a reminder that we might be asking too much from nature to solve our very man-made problems. So tonight we are going to talk about nature-based solutions, the definitions, the meaning, the opportunities, but also the problems that are behind nature-based solutions. And for this, I'll need the help of the panelists. And the first panelist that I'd like to invite is Dr. Radhika from... so Radhika is a 2021 National Geographic Explorer. She got her PhD from NUS. She specialized in coastal ecology, interested in understanding coastal environmental changes in the tropics, and also understanding the impact this has on local communities. Welcome, Radhika.
Thanks, everyone. It's very exciting to be here. If I click, yeah, that's me. So I'm a coastal geographer, rather an interdisciplinary coastal geographer. And I also use satellite images at times. What this means is that when I'm studying the coast, I'm sometimes dancing underwater, sometimes chilling on the boat pretending to take some notes. No, I'm actually collecting data. Sometimes I have to climb and measure mangrove trees. Sometimes I'm posing on the boat. No, I'm traveling across islands to talk to local communities and understand how are they adapting or mitigating or protecting coastlines and coastal ecosystems. And finally, whenever I'm in the field, I like taking my naps on the boat. So I relate to how hard it is to get to from one point to another, and that's where most of our time goes in the field. So for my PhD at NUS and the work I did with the National Geographic Society, I worked with the mangrove ecosystems. So we heard the pitch for peatlands. I am here representing mangroves and making a pitch for how awesome they are. And they're all across the world, of course, in the tropics and the subtropics. What you just saw was the Sundarbans, the largest contiguous mangrove forest between India and Bangladesh. And here, the changing lines you see here are the retreating coastlines. Sorry. Yes, thank you for whoever's doing that for me. So the lines that you see here are the retreating shorelines in the Sundarbans. It's, like I said, it's the largest mangrove forest. So the first time I visited it, I imagined that mangroves are there protecting the shorelines, but that's not what was happening there. In fact, mangroves needed protection, and they were not doing a great job at protecting the shorelines because we didn't let them stay around to protect the shorelines. We built concrete embankments in the name of adaptations. Clearly, those adaptations failed and led to many, many thousands of people who had to migrate out of that area. Next slide, please. Yeah. That was my work on coastal adaptations. Now I'm moving towards also understanding climate change mitigation from these coastal ecosystems and working with governments to understand why blue carbon, including mangroves, seagrasses, and mudflats, play a very small role in climate change mitigation, especially with UNFCCC, and how can we do a better job at protecting and also using their adaptation and mitigation benefits. That's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Radhika. Thank you. The next speaker is Dr. Alex Cobb. You might have seen Alex on some photos from Joshua and Raiyan, except that he was wearing different dresses than tonight. Dr. Alex Cobb is a senior principal research scientist at the Singapore MIT Alliance for Research and Technology. Alex is interested in describing the exchange of water, carbon, and energy at the ecosystem scale using field-based observation and mathematical models. Alex is also developing a new methodology for tropical peatlands carbon projects for the verified carbon standards. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you, Pierre, for the very nice introduction. So I'm not very well prepared, so I thought I would start by telling a story. So when I was a graduate student, I was studying the water relations of rattans in Sabah, and that was in 1999. So as you can see, I'm still in the region. It made an impression on me. I was working on how water is transported through plants, and so I was in Sepilok, near Sandakan, Eastern Sabah, and every day I would come into the lab and I would pump water through sticks to measure how easy it was for water to flow through plants. I liked this. It's interesting intellectually. It's a neat physiological problem. And the guys that I was working with in the herbarium for the forest department in Sabah, one of my friends, this guy Postar, would come in and say, "Oh, that's really interesting. I think we could use something like this to get water to our house in my village." And that triggered a crisis for me, honestly. I when I came back to America, to my lab, I thought to myself, what am I doing? I find my work intellectually stimulating, but there are bigger problems out there. So that was part of the reason that I jumped at the chance to work on tropical peatlands, because they are an important frontier of land degradation in Southeast Asia. The fact that they store so much carbon gives them a special status, I think, in the context of what we now call nature-based solutions. And so I think that there is hope there that the current excitement about these issues related to greenhouse gas emissions can help to protect ecosystems and also help communities, ideally. And anyway, that's how I got here. So for the last 15 years, I've been working mostly on the hydrology and ecosystem processes in tropical peatlands, especially in Brunei, also in Malaysia and Indonesia. And mostly on a basic science level, we want to understand how natural peatlands work, because otherwise it's hard to know how to restore them to a natural condition. More recently, I've gotten interested in trying to find a way to help real projects to meet their objectives, so how you can design projects hydrologically to achieve their aims. So that's me in a nutshell. Thank you.
All right, speaker number 3, he's on my left, Dr. Simon Schillebeeckx. Is it okay? Not too bad? Yeah? That was the most stressful part of my evening. So Dr. Simon is an assistant professor of strategy and entrepreneurship at the Lee Kong Chian School of Business of SMU. He's also the co-founder of Handprint and the co-founder of a non-profit named the Global Mangrove Trust. So welcome, Simon. Please extend this introduction.
Hi. For those who've seen me before, welcome back. For those who've just arrived earlier this evening, so thanks for being here. So I'll share a couple of slides just to kind of explore a little bit about what I'm working on. So these are the data from yesterday. So 419, not great, should be below 350. We're going through the 6th mass extinction right now in terms of biodiversity. And despite a lot of progress made in the last 20 years, we still have about 10% of people that live in abject poverty. And so the work that I've been doing over the last going on 20 years really is trying to solve some of these critical challenges. But I'm not a real scientist, not like these people who spoke here before me. I'm just a business school academic. So, but the problem is quite sizable. If we're looking at the problem, we're looking at a shortage of about $3.3 to $4.5 trillion per year in order to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And the question becomes like, how are we going to solve this? And there's a lot of attention to carbon. Of course, this is AlterCOP, but there's a lot more that we need to be concerned about, right? So here today, we're speaking a lot about biodiversity as well. Rockstrom's work on the planetary boundaries indicates that by 2023, we transgressed against 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries. And in simple terms, that is not good. We should be in the green zone everywhere, and we're really not. So the question then becomes, how can we do something, or at least anything, about this? So as an academic, what you do is write papers, at least in the business school, and that doesn't help anyone. So after a while of basically being just an academic, I was kind of forced into starting to think about, like, how can I do a little bit more? I went into academia after being a consultant because I wanted to understand problems at a more fundamental, at a deeper level. But once I was in academia, I was only doing that. I got frustrated by the fact that the only thing I did was understanding and writing and not really doing. And so I've been trying to work since I became an entrepreneur in 2018 on this question of like, how do we get companies to solve critical problems in the world? And so one of the things that I like to highlight here is, of course, I come out of strategy, so that's kind of my background, is that when like 10, 15 years ago, normally this is a moving slide, but it couldn't happen. So 10, 15 years ago, sustainability was all about this, right? Companies that were doing sustainability at scale were different than everyone else. And as a consequence, they could claim that they were doing something different, they could command a premium, and this was really why companies did sustainability. And so you had a few companies that were excelling in this, relatively speaking, and they could charge a premium price. Now, Porter, who is the kind of father of strategy, argues that there's only two strategies that really work if you want to be a big company. So you either have to be different so that you can charge more money for the same stuff, or you have to be more efficient so that you can be a cost leader. And so what we've seen happening over the last 5-6 years is really that sustainability has been pushed into the cost leadership perspective. That means that right now, most of what we can do with sustainability is simply cheaper. And that's awesome. Unfortunately, companies don't really recognize this. But because this has happened also in large due to regulation, because now sustainability and reporting and all of that stuff is kind of mandatory, there's this new frontier now in terms of we can do something different to really create this competitive advantage. And that's what we call regeneration or regenerative sustainability. I mean, some people are very obsessed with the exact meaning of the word regeneration. I understand it as doing something good. And so what did I start to do to kind of make some changes? So one is in 2018, we went to Myanmar to work in a mangrove restoration group. We're really impressed by the importance of mangroves, but also really saddened by the story of 2008, where in Myanmar, in the Bay of Bengal, the cyclone Nargis hit and killed about 138,000 people. So it made me realize that protecting nature is really about people. And we came back from this trip, my co-founder Raiyan and I set up Global Mangrove Trust in order to initially help one organization in Myanmar, and then as we grew as an organization, help more organizations really around community-based mangrove restoration. Part of what we've been able to do with this group is be a silent partner in the development of a new carbon crediting agency called Oxcarbon, in collaboration with Oxford University, that is trying to focus on more scalable approaches to verifying state change in forest and issuing carbon credits. So the goals of Oxcarbon are to do 1,000x, 10 times better scientific accuracy, which is a massive problem. I'm sure the guy from Sylvera will talk about this. 10 times higher speed to market, because right now carbon development projects take 3 to 5 years before you can go to market. And also 10 times cheaper than analog certifiers. I have a lot of bad things to say about them, and I'll keep that for the panel. So that's GMT, and then a year later, one of my good friends kind of got interested in what we were doing and convinced us to set up a company called Handprint, that is trying to solve this problem of nature and underinvestment in critical ecosystems in a very different way. We use a market-based approach, and we help companies capture value from the creation of positive impact by doing something different. We can talk more about that later as well. I think I've run out of time, right? Okay, so then I'll skip the other slide.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Simon. Then our last speaker is Louis Booth, who is the director of Sylvera for the Asian Pacific region. Sylvera is a leading carbon data provider, and please, Louis, help us know more about what you do.
Thank you very much. I'm in esteemed company today, so I'm very happy to be speaking to you all today. I do work for Sylvera. We see, I think, very much what Simon was picking up on, which is an increasing number of companies and governments are trying to participate in this carbon market, as we have referenced it a few times, and we'll discuss it in more detail a little later. The problem with carbon markets is that you are trying to finance something that is very difficult to measure, very difficult to sustain, very difficult to put a fair value on. when companies are participating, what they do is they buy carbon credits, they invest in carbon projects, they finance some of the research, they actually go out and buy up some of the land sometimes, and doing all of this has been very well noted by some of our speakers today is extremely complex. What's particularly complex is how do you, as a company, as a person, as a government, know that what is being done in the field, what is being implemented in terms of activities is what it says it is, right? It's not like you have a really easy way of saying, well, I have stored or avoided the emissions of 1 ton of carbon, and that's that. So companies have to rely on a very complex web of agencies and stakeholders that they have to trust. And Sylvera was built, nearly a decade ago to help bring that trust, right? And help these people that are financing projects and putting money towards it, sometimes with good intentions, sometimes with not, to actually understand whether what they were doing was truly and meaningfully impactful. So we're an independent data provider. We use some science that has been discussed in this room, but also we actually have field teams ourselves. And the idea is, can you actually help bring some of that trust back to a market that has lost a lot of it? All of you today can Google carbon credits. You can Google carbon markets, and you will be overwhelmed by scandal and distrust and betrayal. The truth is that if we are going to finance and bring that finance that Simon rightly pointed out, in the trillions of dollars every year, you need to have every single lever available to you, and carbon markets is one of those. So we provide that data for those companies. What that means is that we do the due diligence on the carbon projects that they are financing to tell them whether they're doing what they say they are doing. Sometimes you're a corporate office in Europe and you're financing a project in Bangladesh, or you're a Japanese entity that is trying to help reforest part of Brazil. That's a lot of stakeholders, that's a lot of uncertainty. So we use a very complex network of experts to help us determine whether carbon projects are doing what they say they are doing. And so we'll talk about it in a bit more detail later. But really, I'm here to sort of speak for how carbon markets have so much potential, and there's latent money there. There's financing that can come to it. We just need to rebuild those trusts that have been lost a little bit. So yeah, that's for me. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Louis. So please, panelists, let's have a seat and have a chat. You can take one. Yeah, we're missing one chair. It's coming. Yeah, and then, Alex goes in the middle. Great. Thanks, the four of you, for the introduction. My first question, I guess the first couple of questions are going to focus on nature-based carbon projects. And the first question is, to whom are nature-based carbon projects the most useful for? Are they most useful for the climate? Are they most useful for the local communities? Or are they most useful for the deep pocket companies? Alex, do you want to go first?
I think it's just waking up. It's a good question.
Thank you.
Well, of course, the goal is to basically the issue that we're addressing in this space is a public good. It's I have a business at my house, and my business produces some waste. If I want to get the waste removed from my premises, I have to pay a company. But if I burn it, I don't have to do that. And that way, it doesn't really hurt anybody that much. It goes into the sky, and I don't have to pay. So that's good from my perspective. But if everybody does it, then eventually it becomes a problem, right? And that's pretty much the situation that we're in. So something like 25 years ago, a lot of people got interested in these kinds of problems, and the word that people like to use is externalization, right? I'm externalizing one of my costs, which is waste disposal. And the challenge is how is that coped with economically? And that is, in a way, the objective of the carbon markets, is to try to cope with that kind of problem. And the goal, of course, is to benefit the climate. But when we talk about nature-based solutions, I think that one of the complicating factors is that many of us get into this space of nature-based solutions not just because we care about the climate. They are actually a really good idea, even if you only care about the climate. But if you also care about biodiversity and ecosystems, they have additional potential benefits if projects are run effectively. So in my view, so as somebody who works on peatlands, I see tens of thousands of hectares of peatlands being converted every year if I look on Google Earth. And the only mechanism that I'm aware of that is stopping that currently is the voluntary carbon market. And so I see it as something that does have potentially a huge local benefit, both in terms of nature, however you want to look at that, potentially in terms of local communities, because local communities, I mean, the reason that peatlands get converted to oil palm is not because people don't like peatlands, right? It's because that's an economic opportunity for people that need some source of income. And if that income can instead come from the carbon markets, most people are happy about that, as long as everything is fair. So, and of course, those are the devils in the details. That's what I would say.
Thank you.
So I would say, ideally it should be all three. I think in reality it is all three. So it is the climate benefits, it is the communities that can benefit if they are involved and they are party to the benefit sharing agreements. But the vast majority of the benefit goes to the intermediaries. And I think this is the fundamental problem of the carbon markets as they are right now. There is very little price transparency in this market. Like some companies like Forest, and so they're trying to create some of this price transparency, but in reality, carbon credits are sold at the maximum price that somebody's willing to pay. Right. And this creates very perverse incentives, as we've seen with the scandals you highlighted, like South Pole and so. And if we look at the kind of breakdown of the money, like if a company pays 20 in the voluntary carbon markets, $20 to $50 for 1 ton of carbon that they can retire, where is this money going? And the unfortunate reality is that typically between 10 to 30, maybe 40%, but more 10 to 20, is going to the communities on the ground that are actually doing the work. All the rest is absorbed by intermediaries. And that includes financing, that includes reselling, which are the worst. That includes the verification, which is important, potentially audit, all of those things. But it tends to be between 60 and 70% of the total price. And so if the question is who benefits the most, then the unfortunate reality is the intermediaries.
Good answer. When I was thinking about this question, I had the optimist in me and I had the realist in me. So the optimist in me is why I got into the carbon markets in the first place, which was my family is generations of farmers, and my father would always say, you know, who is going to pay me to do all these good things I could be doing instead of doing large-scale agriculture, which, you know, he was doing for a few years. So it was your point about what's the alternative and how do you finance things such as planting new hedgerows, planting new trees, implementing agroforestry. So the optimist in me would answer, well, it gives a solution to people like my father. It gives people who want to do something else than just follow the money a real option and a competitive option. It's a bit different in Europe, where my father is a family because he has a bunch of results-based payments mechanisms. He doesn't have to use carbon markets. But it would certainly help if there was such a system that was advanced and sophisticated enough. So the optimist in me says this. The realist is closer to where Simon's sitting, which is carbon markets, I think, or nature-based credits that come from nature-based solutions. For many years, they were used as a conveyor of profit for the intermediaries that has been mentioned, but also as a way of signaling that you're doing good you know, as a company and saying, hey, look, this great thing I'm doing. Delta Airlines saying that flying is sustainable using their services. VW saying that their cars actually help nature. So, you know, it's completely crazy. A lot of that is changing though. So for those of you that still think that happens, it's happening less and less, and that's because, you know, us in the room, civil society has caught on that they were doing this. And laws are being passed so that you can now no longer say that you are a carbon neutral, good for the planet airline. In Europe and in Australia and starting in the US, and it will eventually, the optimist in me actually thinks it'll progress. So the realist in me says that we actually don't really have much use for these credits at the moment, right? We have governments that kind of want to finance good, companies that kind of reluctantly want to. So there's a lot of work being done in the market at the moment to determine exactly what they're useful for. And so that's where the sort of realist in me is still a bit questioning your question.
Thanks. Radhika, if I may complement, from your extensive experience working with local coastal communities, have you seen any positive impact that was led by nature-based carbon credits or carbon projects?
So specifically talking about carbon, I'm going to let one of my uncles from the field in Bangladesh answer this. So he was very confused. He was like, okay, he was curious about my research. So he was asking what I am doing, and I was trying to translate what my brain thinks in English. I speak a different language, Hindi. He speaks a different language. So I was translating carbon credits and nature-based solutions in 3 languages, and he was like, just stop. First, few decades ago, Forest Department came and said that we need to protect this ecosystem. So we believed them. Then the REDD+, especially for mangroves and some other forests, the RED+ policies came in. Then the Ramsar Convention came in. Then they called Sundarbans as the UNESCO World Heritage Site. So we believed that, and we went ahead with whatever they wanted to do. Then restoration became a big thing. People were throwing money onto our ecosystems. They were asking us to build mangrove nursery. We did that. We got some money out of it. And now you are talking about some invisible thing stored in the system, and it's going to help the world. But he was like, but after all of these 5-6 phases over many decades, the forest is pretty much the same. The problems are the same. There's still an upstream dam between India and Bangladesh that one country uses to control the other country and then stops water when the other country is thirsty. And that dam is impacting the system. That's stopping the sediments. That's increasing the river water to come in. So he was like, why all of these projects are not focusing on the main problem, but are talking about these very big picture things that our local forest can do for the world, but it's not really pinning the problem, which is known. So that was one of the things I kept hearing over and over from the communities, that of course if it's successful and if it's planned very well, if it's effective, it's going to be good for everyone. It's going to mitigate carbon, it's going to help with adaptation, it's going to provide food, it's going to provide fisheries and provide protection. But that is that really happening on the grounds? If not, then it's just, I'm looking for a better word to frame it, but it's just another package deal that's not really hitting the nail.
Yeah, it looks like credibility is very important when developing projects, including carbon credits. So this brings me to the second question. That's something we've mentioned briefly, at least some of you. In the past few years, we've seen different media coverage and peer-reviewed studies that reported large discrepancies in carbon accounting measurements. This has chilled the markets, investors. And so now there are big questions that arise. And my question for you is, do you think this chain of events is part of an immature market becoming mature, and that's necessary to make the market improve? Or do you think that the problem is a bit more systemic and theoretical, and it's going to be hard to address despite the challenges that have been identified? You want to go first? Yeah?
Yeah, I'd happily go first. So absolutely. So the scrutiny that has been placed on carbon markets has definitely chilled appetites, particularly from companies and some governments. Some of that reporting often cherry-picked or chose certain case studies to make a broader point. I would say, despite that research sometimes being flawed, the broader point is valid. We have reviewed, as a company, 400 carbon projects. About 1/3 of them we deem to be actually meeting the carbon accounting that they claim. That means 2/3 are either medium, missing the target, or completely missing the target entirely. So I think the broader narrative is correct. And I think where it's bringing us is to a healthier market, because we can actually start providing solutions to these projects that have been, in some cases, overclaiming. Some cases, they have been not doing the activities they said they were supposed to do, or in some cases, just straight up harming communities. So I'd say the broader point is there, and I think it is a reflection of maturity. When we look at these flagship projects that were criticized, again, some were unfairly criticized, but those that were, is a real mix between nefarious actors that were deliberately pumping the system to make money and not actually doing the activities on the ground that you've rightly mentioned. And others, they were just making very flawed mistakes based on very flawed science, or what they thought was scientific approaches. So yeah, I think these are improving. I think, just to concur with a broader point, it is a correct one. There are a number of projects in the thousands that are nowhere near where they're supposed to be, and generating carbon credits they do not deserve. So we see that as actually a positive moment in the market, where we can actually hit the brakes and say, hang on, all these intermediaries making loads of money, all these companies flying carbon neutral, maybe we do need to slow that down so that we can redress it. And those redressive actions are taking place at the moment, just maybe a little slower than we all wish.
I'll take a little bit of a different perspective. I mean, I agree with what you said. I think there's positives to this, but I think there is a more fundamental problem. That the question is really, for me, and kind of come back to what I said before, is that the idea that when we developed this carbon market, kind of that grew out of the Kyoto Protocol and then the voluntary carbon market, but the idea or the arrogance that we had that we're going to be able to do this so well that we're going to allow companies to say, well, we're putting 1,000 tons of carbon in the market, in the atmosphere, which we know for sure they do, and then say, oh, we're going to buy these things that we completely don't understand, and then we're going to say that it's okay because we did X, but we also did minus X. That arrogance, that is really the beginning of the carbon market, is really, is for me, the fundamental problem. Like, we should never have we should have thought about this more deeply, and we should have probably designed a much better system. A system that doesn't rely on carbon credits to be used for offsetting claims. Because the problem for me is not really with the credibility of the carbon credit. It's, as long as it's not used for offsetting claims, the credibility of the carbon credit is also much less problematic. Even if you say, like, well, I buy 10,000 tons, but actually it's only 5,000, it's less problematic if it's not bought as an excuse to still pollute 5,000 tons. So I think we need to come up with a new system. That's really my goal, and say, like, where you detach footprints with negative impacts and handprints positive impact, and try to come up with separate reasons for companies to invest in positive impact and invest in reducing negative impact. But this idea that you can do A and B, which is really an invention from oil companies, right? These are the ones that came up with this nonsense, I think is the fundamental problem with the carbon market.
May I speak? I think I think maybe I have it's not a unique perspective, but in the last the better part of this year, I've been working with a team on developing a new methodology for peatland voluntary carbon market projects, which has been a very interesting activity. It's a little bit like if you're but I mean, a lot of it is related to what Louis mentioned, which is that the space includes a lot of people that are in the space for idealistic reasons. They want to do good projects. It also includes some cynical actors. And so the really challenging thing for the perspective of us, for example, developing this methodology, is try to accommodate good projects without allowing abuse. This is incredibly difficult. So that's the first point that I wanted to make. The second is that I think the fundamental issue of uncertainty is that these kinds of projects, it's true, are fundamentally uncertain. And it comes primarily not from, there is of course uncertainty associated with measuring stocks, with measuring fluxes, these kinds of things. But it's mostly related to what would have happened if a project wasn't done. So as you might know, most of the kinds of nature-based projects that we're talking about, you're credited on the difference between what actually happens in your project and what would have happened if you didn't do the project. And this creates a fundamental level of uncertainty, but it's not an impossible level of uncertainty. So the responsibility for us, like in the position of developing a methodology, we want to make sure that on average, projects are not over-credited. And it has to be on average, because nobody knows what really would have happened in a project area without the project. And so that, I think, is the fundamental challenge of these kinds of projects. What I think is lamentable about what happened in the last year with the nature-based markets is that people have fled from these kinds of projects to projects like carbon capture and storage or carbon dioxide removal. These are fantastically expensive on the one hand, and on the other hand, so to give you an idea, like direct air capture, $500 to $1,000 a ton, something like that, because it's like trying to put smoke back in a cigarette. It is, and this is the perverse thing. It's much better if you don't light the cigarette in the first place. But the thing is that it's and this is the perverse thing about the whole space. You can be much more certain about we'll get into this later, but the additionality of removals project than you can about an avoided emissions project. But avoided emissions projects are way, way better, objectively, if they could be precisely quantified. And so that is the challenge of those of us that are working in this space, is to try to figure out how to quantify the uncertainty in that. If I buy a credit, what is the distribution of probabilities that it actually accounts for the avoided emission of 1 ton of CO2? That's a technical problem. And actually people in the finance space should understand this, because you're used to thinking about risk. And so I think that it is the kind of problem that we can solve. It's just, and in that sense, all of the additional scrutiny is very, very good. But again, I think there's a number of perversities in the way that things work right now, and one of them is that it's more attractive to capture air from a smokestack with a multi-billion-dollar facility linked to oil extraction than it is to prevent deforestation of a peatland. I think that's perverse, personally.
Yeah, but we've learned earlier today that 98% of the carbon dioxide removal carbon credits are being issued from nature-based projects, and that in fact all those technology-led carbon credits are very minor, if not just a curiosity on the market. I highlight your point that avoided emissions is the priority, because it generates other benefits.
Sorry, can I say one more thing?
Yes.
I just wanted to note that the typical side effect of carbon capture projects is usually it's used for enhanced oil recovery, which means that it's used to reduce the cost of getting more oil out of the ground. That's the co-benefit.
Yeah. All right, so now I'm going to ask sequentially 2 questions that are directly addressed to one of the panelists. So the first one is for Louis to close this chapter on nature-based carbon markets. And I want to go back to what happened last week at COP in Baku, where we've heard from the news that there has been a breakthrough. One of the perhaps only good news that came up was related to Article 6 and carbon trade and all this. So please, based on your experience, your knowledge, can you just share your views on what happened and how good or not so good is it?
Yeah, happy to. So far we've assumed that carbon credits are being bought by companies or people. That is not the only way that the carbon projects are getting financed and the carbon credits are being transacted. Article 6 of the Paris Agreement basically helps us try and determine market-based mechanisms that can help us finance climate. So Article 6.2 is the currently most widely used, which is government to government. A government like Singapore for its carbon tax has agreements with a bunch of different countries, and it will finance through its private sector or directly through government procurement carbon projects, and in exchange it'll take those carbon credits home. Article 6.2 it enables the correct accounting between the two governments, so that if I am Ghana and I am Singapore, we are not both claiming those emissions that we have either avoided or removed. 6.2 has been percolating quite slowly and quite well, I would say. It's not perfect. Within the Paris Agreement, there's also this other mechanism called Article 6.4, which is, instead of government to government, which is quite inefficient, we have to have diplomatic ties, we have to have negotiations around the projects, accept the projects, agree to this accounting mechanism. Why don't we just create one centralized system where I can throw all my projects onto it, and then any government who buys those credits can then adjust their balance sheet, their carbon balance sheet at the end of the day. So this is something that has been a decade in the making, has not progressed really for the last 10 years for a number of reasons, mostly around governments or different regions disagreeing on the mechanics of it. So last week, there was big progress on this one centralized system where they agreed on the framework and the standards that would be used to actually implement this Article 6.4 agreement. So this now means that if I am a country that is selling carbon credits, I'm implementing peatland restoration, I'm implementing forest protection or reforestation, and I want to sell them to other governments or to people, to corporates, I can put them on this central UN registry that is going to be designed and built by S&P. That's by the by. So the good thing about this is that I have spoken to a lot of countries who are waiting for this to be implemented so that they can start actually selling their credits outside of this voluntary system that we've been discussing so far. They want all the accounting to be done correctly. They want to follow methodologies that are approved by the United Nations, which they see as safer than the voluntary markets. And also they see it as a sort of an easier way to access carbon financing. So that's the positive. I think the downside is that currently it's still not implemented, and it might take 2-3 years to actually be implemented. Also, now it's on the United Nations to agree on these methodologies that are going to be used. Now, we'll see where that goes. There are new methodologies, such as the one I'm sure you're developing, that use new techniques, new scientific approaches to calculating, monitoring, and verifying carbon stocks. There is a risk that this Article 6.4 that has just been agreed may use some of the outdated methodologies, which, while designed in good faith, I'm sure, don't account for some of these new techniques, some of this new research that is being done. So there's still a lot of uncertainty around exactly those methodologies. And then quite simply, if people don't trust this thing, then it will never take off in the first place. So we have to see how it's going to develop. There's more to be negotiated at the moment in Baku. And then we'll see what happens in the new year, which is when the first methodologies should be considered. And we'll learn a lot by what they consider. If they consider these old methodologies only, then we may be in for another low integrity system. If they open the doors a bit more widely and accept newer methodologies, innovative methodologies, then we might be in a good spot for a scalable, properly accountable carbon market. So that's the progress that was made last week.
All right, thanks, Lisa. Probably a good way forward, but we need to wait and see, I guess. Before the next question, you can have a look at the screen on the top right. There is a QR code that's for you to ask your questions. We're going to open the floor for questions soon. My next question is beyond carbon. It's for you, Radhika. Can you share with us, what's your definition of nature-based solutions? What are the other services that we can consider from those solutions? And how to maybe quantify them, if we should.
So nature-based solutions, as the word says, is any solution specifically targeting to climate change that's coming from nature. We are relying on the different services of nature. So I'll take example of mangroves. There's a mangrove tree. It has its giant root system that protects the shoreline. It has its other biochemical mechanisms that's storing the carbon, and it's also providing nurseries for fishes, and it's also providing food. This is the ecology of, very basic ecology of mangrove. Of course, it also includes the local people who live nearby that area and are getting benefit from being around a mangrove forest, maybe water purification, carbon, climate, temperatures, and all of those things. So any kind of feature of this mangrove tree that we can utilize to solve one of the issues that global warming or climate change is causing. This is nature-based solutions in the simplest ways. So some of the ways in which, or some of the mechanisms of nature-based solutions are the simplest one, protection. So we protect an ecosystem for what it is, for what it's doing, and letting nature be. In many studies and in many cases, we have seen that when you let nature be, it knows how to solve its issues and problems in its own way. The second one is mitigation, which we discussed quite very nicely up until now. Mitigation is, so why is global warming happening? Let's look at the basics. The carbon dioxide is increasing. The carbon is going in the atmosphere. If you can bring it back and put it back into the environment, create a carbon vault, store it, lock it in, then you are mitigating some of those impacts. So many ecosystems like peatlands, mangroves, seagrass, mudflats, terrestrial forests, that's a basic thing they do. They do photosynthesis, they absorb carbon dioxide. They have different capacities, so we can rank them. So that's mitigating against climate change. So we have protection, mitigation. The third one is adaptation. So you are adapting to some of the impacts that you know are already going to happen. So some of the coastal communities that are exposed to sea level rise or exposed to erosion, exposed to other downstream impacts from dams and other things that you cannot manage at a bigger scale, you try to adapt to it. You adapt by building higher grounds, you adapt by creating a wall, like West Coast Park, we have that, or you adapt by, so these will not be your nature-based solutions to adaptations, but you can utilize adaptive features from coral reefs or seagrasses and mangroves that prevent the oncoming impact of waves. So that's adaptation. And the last one I wanted to mention in terms of the umbrella of nature-based solutions is restoration. So when you have tried to protect it, tried mitigation, tried adaptation, you find an area that used to be a mangrove, for example, and is now abandoned, there's potential for it to be restored, and then you restore it back to give these properties of mitigation and adaptation, then that's also one of the nature-based solutions.
Thank you, Radhika. Simon, you also work on mangroves, and I think from what I understand, you want to have a holistic approach on nature-based solutions and what they can generate. So do you also, are you able to integrate the value on biodiversity of the different projects you are developing?
The question is quite complex because on the one side there is, are we able to measure whether or not there are biodiversity improvements? There's a lot of innovation in this space right now, from eDNA to soundscaping to just video traps to footprint traps to lots of different ways in which quantification of biodiversity becomes possible. So I think the biodiversity question, especially on land, we can probably get to some kind of measurement. Whether that measurement is going to have any legitimacy is then something else. So we're in the very early stages. I mean, Ash was talking about biodiversity crediting and kind of developing the standards.
Nature credit, yeah.
Nature credits. Savimbo in Colombia is developing a project. Gentian in the UK is developing a technology to do this at scale. So the measurement question is something we will solve. And it's going to be highly problematic and it's going to be highly incorrect, but we're going to have some kind of quantification. But the question is, can we integrate it? And then that is really a different question. The question then becomes, is anybody willing to pay for it? Right? And right now, I think this is really just beginning. And one of the big moves that we've seen in this space is the emergence of the TNFD, the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, in the voluntary space that is starting to encourage companies to quantify their negative impact on nature, but also quantify their positive impact on nature, and encourage companies to go beyond just footprint reduction, but actually try to support biodiversity in an active way. And so there is a little bit of that. And so we're seeing now, if we look at like my own company, we see the first companies that are coming to us and said, we want to develop a nature portfolio. And it's not about carbon. So, but this is like the last 2 months, 3 months, right, that we've been seeing this. So I think there is going to become, we're going to build this market. I hope it's not going to look anything like the carbon credit market, but it's going to be a market that focuses on creating positive impact without kind of focusing on compensation. But I think that's where I see good signs.
Louis, Alex, do you want to complement on this? Maybe, considering biodiversity in the way we can develop nature-based projects.
I'll just say something quick, which might be interesting to the audience if you don't know already. So currently, one of the interesting peculiarities of the voluntary carbon market is that it is possible for biodiversity somehow to go into the price of a carbon credit. Because if I am the buyer of the credits and I like orangutans, and you tell me that your project is going to protect orangutans, then maybe I'm willing to pay more for it, and that does happen. And that is what's interesting to me on an intellectual level is that this does not come into the picture in compliance markets. Because in a compliance market, a carbon credit is a carbon credit. You don't have mauve and purple and green carbon credits, right? You have carbon credits. On the voluntary market, because it's an immature market and because people can pay whatever they're willing to pay for them, then there is currently this very corner market kind of mechanism for this sort of thing to be priced in. It's a peculiarity of the current situation, for better and for worse. So I think that's the main comment I wanted to make. The one other thing I wanted to say is just that, it was a question for Simon. I was curious about who will pay for what you were describing, the positive impacts.
I mean, I can't really tell you the name of the customers.
In principle, like
in
the types of
principle,
actors.
so I think this might take a bit long to answer. So
You have 1 minute.
all right. So the idea and the fundamental concept that underpins what Handprint does is that we detach the value that a company can capture from the creation of positive impact from the underlying asset itself. Right? For me, the fundamental problem with investing in nature, or the question here on the screen of the commodification of nature, is that the expectation is that the underlying asset itself needs to generate returns. Unfortunately, by and large, nature is uninvestable. So what Handprint does is change that by saying the underlying asset is not generating any returns, but by embedding the credible commitment to support the asset into your engagement and your interactions with your customers or with your employees, you can capture value from improved loyalty, reduced cost of customer acquisition. And these value capture mechanisms are very powerful for companies because they care about loyalty, they care about all of those things, and they're quantifiable. And this is a totally new way of monetizing nature because it doesn't require nature itself to become a profitable asset. It is how it has been deployed in a business model that turns it into something valuable for a company.
Thanks. I'm convinced. I'm so convinced that I propose that we do a fast forward. We're in 2033. COP, 2028, COP 33 is going to happen in Singapore. Greenhouse gas emissions are still going up, and unlike what we expected, the carbon market is not improving. So you've been invited to redefine the playbook of nature-based solutions beyond carbon within the COP happening in Singapore. So please, you all have to share one new golden rule that needs to be in this playbook. And Louis, you start.
No pressure. So, I don't know if this is in the prep questions, but I'm not ready for it. I
rephrased it a little bit.
No, it's okay. So, if if we are in that stage and emissions continue to rise, then carbon markets no longer become about avoiding emissions or removing them. I think they have to integrate, like, they have to be part of climate adaptation at that stage. And so I would redefine nature-based solutions, first of all, as probably, at that point, if we haven't scaled it properly, the only solution that's really available. If we're still trying to scale these removal technologies that, you know, haven't made a dent in the emissions profile, then I would say, yeah, we have to change probably the characteristics of where nature-based solutions go. And beyond carbon, I would look at mitigation and climate adaptation as a necessity in terms of all these funds that will help climate adaptation and mitigation. They should be looking at nature-based solutions as part of a carbon market or a joint carbon market of some kind. Sorry, it's not a great answer, but it's what came to mind. Because I thought about Singapore and I thought about the region in particular. And at that point, if emissions are still growing and we haven't scaled nature-based solutions properly, then, you know, it becomes existential at that point for Southeast Asia.
Stop worrying about additionality. That would be my golden rule. I think a critical problem in the carbon market, and you will know this better than me as a verifier, is that a lot of time and money is spent on defining what is additional. And when we are in that stage, and we will be, I'm very convinced about it, we really should stop caring about additionality. We should start thinking about, like, anything we can do to protect whatever we have left should be valuable. And if that means we need to send money to a country that has never cut any tree because they're sensible, and there's no risk at all of them being cut, they should still be rewarded. So I think sacrificing the principle of additionality might actually help us in accelerate funding towards the actual work that needs to happen on the ground and reduce a lot of the work that disappears in the intermediary space. So that would be my...
Yeah, that's a good answer. I often say that it could be useful sometimes to take the perspective of the atmosphere instead of the companies that are interested in those carbon credits, because at the end of the day, what really matters is how much carbon is going or not going to the atmosphere, and additionality is actually one challenge sometimes to address this. Yeah. Alex, do you need more time?
No. I guess what I would say is, I guess just a point that I wanted to make is that I think that most people in this space, certainly I, believe that the role of the voluntary carbon market should be temporary. And part of the reason that I say that is that I don't believe, so it's true that currently the voluntary carbon market is an important way that resources are getting directed towards conservation and restoration of nature. But in reality, one of the major limiting factors is the number of private market actors that are capable of implementing a project on the scale that's necessary. I don't think there is the capability within the private domain to actually do what needs to be done to protect and restore ecosystems on the scale that's necessary to avoid a climate catastrophe. At some point, governments have to get involved. And so I think many of us working in this space see it as something temporary, a bridge towards involvement of regional and national governments. If that hasn't happened by 2028 or 2033, then we're in really big trouble. So that's one of the things I would say. The other comment is, I think, maybe cheating a little bit off of what you were asking, but one point I would like to make anyway is that I think one of the problems, one of the criticisms that's levied at the voluntary carbon market that is legitimate, and if I could fix one thing, it would be this, and I don't have a solution, is that the incentives. Oh, look at that. It's true that the incentives within the system all kind of point in the same direction. So if I'm a project developer, then I would like you to believe that my project is going to have a net climate benefit. If I am a registry of carbon projects, it's true that I can't continue to exist if I can't register projects that have a positive impact. if I'm an auditor of carbon projects, sooner or later I've got to say that a project is legitimate or there's no market for my services, right? All of the incentives point in the same direction. And how that gets improved, I think, is a fundamental challenge within the space. But I think there's creative solutions, some way of creating some kind of adversarial relationship in there, or some kind of peer-based thing. Anyway, I think that's one of the weaknesses of the market.
So Pierre, your question was what one rule we'll add to the book of nature-based solutions. So
Thanks for trying to answer my question.
so if I have to add one small rule, and I'm gonna put it on the top, is to remember nature protects when she's protected, and nature just is. So we are putting all our brains to figure out what's the best value of carbon credit and how to get the most money out of this investment. But how about we also put our brains into thinking how can we let nature be and let nature do its job that it does amazingly well without putting a monetary value on it. But since I'm also the only female who's asked to put rules in this rule book, I'm gonna add one more rule. I'm gonna cheat here. I'm gonna ask to forget about the specific amount of carbon sequestration or specific dollar value of that carbon, but put co-benefits at the center stage. So what else if a company is investing in a project, maybe it's not producing as much carbon, but it's really important for the livelihoods of the local people for this project to go through. So maybe we put our perspectives over there and let carbon sequestration and all the other benefits happen.
Thank you, Radhika. Thanks a lot. It looks like quantifying the unquantifiable is one of the challenges that Simon mentioned, and Radhika is also suggesting. So that's, I think, a good thought that we can have. And now it's time to look at questions from the audience. But I think it's always more dynamic if we got live questions. So please, if you want to contribute to this discussion, yeah, let's go on. We just need to share a microphone.
Hello, thank you for the amazing panel. It was super interesting and informative. Just a question to everyone, right? Like to Radha's point where she mentioned that there are so many ways that nature does, like adaptation, mitigation, everything. And let's talk about me as a layman. I want to invest in that somehow. I can do it with time, of course, by going there and helping. But what if I want to do it in some other way, push my company to do it? And we understand that it's not very transparent on how do we know that this is actually going in the right place. So what's like maybe a simple takeaway to make sure that efforts are going in the right place? Anyone can answer.
As a company that is built for this, I would say use our services. Outside of this, there are two parts to your question that I understand it. The first is how to get involved. And at a company level, if you are a stakeholder in a company or an organization, I would start by thinking about something Simon's touched on a lot is what is the utility? What are we trying to achieve as a company in terms of climate? Is it that we're helping our local communities, biodiversity, certain SDG goals that you're trying to target? And I would tailor what you're trying to do, your impact, to the ambitions that you have and the utility that you want out of a carbon credit or a nature credit or anything like this. The second part of your question is around like the verification part. And that's really difficult because, as was correctly pointed out by Alex, the incentives are all in the wrong way at the moment. So think about a process or partners to do due diligence on carbon projects. The documentation, if it's voluntary, the documentation is public, so you can actually read these projects, but there are thousands of projects and the documents are hundreds of pages long. So you need a process, you need to commit to reading through them, and then there are partners available like ours, obviously, but then you can go and work with trusted developers, local stakeholders who actually understand the field is really key as well. So those would be my sort of hot tips.
Thank you.
Hi. Very practical example, and I totally support it. On the other hand, you can, it depends on your scale, if it's an individual, a family, a small scale company, you can also look at your own environment, or maybe even a bigger scale company can look at where the industry, if it's an industry, where is it based, where's your headquarters, which area are you working with. If you're based in Indonesia or Singapore and you're trying to protect mangroves in Colombia, maybe look at your own backyard, see what you can do to support the communities and the environment right in your neighborhood, and then branch out and go bigger scale.
And just to kind of add to that, like, I would do exactly the opposite. Not because we're in Singapore, we have the luxury, we can do stuff locally as long as we don't do it in Singapore. If you want to plant a tree in Singapore, it costs $300, right? You do it in Indonesia, it costs $1.50, and that tree is going to absorb 4 times more carbon and create much more social benefit. So I think the key problem in the sustainability space is that people who went to university and learned about sustainability, they learned about this thing called think global, act local. This is bullshit, right? You want to solve problems, think global, act global. So focus on where does my dollar create most impact? This is the only question that's relevant, right? And it's definitely not going to be in Singapore. It might be in Indonesia, it might be in Bangladesh, it might be in Africa, but that's where you should invest. Might be in Malaysia, yeah, but the quality of the reforestation partners is very bad. So, I mean, I don't know all of them, but so that's the condition. Where does it make the most impact? And of course, how do you define that? There's complexities, but that's what I would focus on.
I just have a quick thing, which I actually think it's quite lovely what Radhika and Simon said today, because it kind of touches on both ends. Sorry, I want to quickly mention, I think, an interesting point of reference. So there's a very interesting, peatland focused, peatland carbon market in Germany. So it was started in one state in Germany, and the concept behind this peatland carbon market was it's like somebody who sells carrots in your local market. You go to your local market, you buy some carrots. If the carrots are no good, you don't buy from the guy anymore. And so you both have. There's a level of trust that develops from proximity is basically what it comes down to. So if you're investing, the problem on the global scale is that if you're investing in a project that's way far away, you don't know what's happening there. So I want to try something on, which is just to say, if I had to give one piece of advice about how to see whether a project's any good, I would go there. If you actually have a chance to see what's happening on the ground, that's actually, I think the transparency that's missing in the market is generated by the fact that, as Simon rightly said, where it's best to act is probably not where you are.
But then it's already 3 tons of CO2 just for you making your way.
I know. Anyway, find a solution. Take a sailboat.
No, it's great. I think it's getting late. Yeah, okay.
So agree to that. Singapore might not be the best idea, but do not be a company who comes and builds industries in India, Sundarbans, Bangladesh, and is wanting to mitigate, and it's looking at outwards and not looking at what it's doing. It's right in its backyard. So know your environment. But maybe Singapore is too small for that suggestion.
If you're in India or Bangladesh, I think there's a lot of stuff you can do that has high nature return on investment.
Thanks, Radhika. You actually answered the question I was going to ask. So thanks for this. And I'm just going to reframe my question or pose my question for you. And that will be the last question. It's in order to end with a note of hope. So my question is trying to understand from your experience, what is the place, the message, the figure that inspires your work that's related to nature-based solutions, and if you could please share this with us tonight. So for you, Radhika, we understand that mangroves in India, in Bangladesh, the Sundarbans are a place of importance and interest. Alex, do you want to continue?
Well, that was a lovely answer from Radhika. For me, maybe I hinted at it already. It's really the place and the people that I've worked with, mostly in Borneo. I just think about that all the time. I mean, in my lifetime, seeing most of, for example, the state of Sabah converted into oil palm plantation, I don't want to see that happen to Southeast Asia. So what inspires me is finding ways for people to have livelihoods that don't require the destruction of traditional lifestyles and nature. that's what inspires me.
Thanks, Alex.
So I also have my mangrove story, but I already told it. So I'm gonna say, for me, the video that kind of changed my life and put me on this track to be really focused on the environment is William McDonough's 2007 TED Talk called Cradle to Cradle, where he introduces the principles of Cradle to Cradle and gives a 20-minute speech that is pure poetry. And I watch it every year, and I make all my students watch it, because I think it is one of the best examples of the kind of a vision for a future of a more sustainable world.
That sounds really good. I've also already mentioned farming and my connection there. Something that really got me interested in nature-based solutions specifically is a film made by a American filmmaker called John Liu in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s, and he was documenting the regeneration of the Laos Plateau in central northern China. An area that had been for years degraded and deforested, mostly through overgrazing, actually. And there's this river that just no longer had any ecosystem to shape itself around. So the Chinese government and a lot of NGOs worked together on restoring this area. So it's a film that is free to view on YouTube. Just type John Liu, Laos Plateau. And what they did there was, instead of let's just plant trees as far as you can see, they said, well, let's bring communities back here, those that had left because there was no longer any farming to be done. So they did agroforestry, cropland, they did some regenerative farming and some forestry. So that was the thing that inspired me the most. And it's the one I think about the most because of its scale, but also how it thought about the diversification of a nature-based solution. It's not just planting a forest and you're done. It's thinking about how that interacts with the communities. And in this case also, it stopped all the dust storms going over Beijing for a long time. So then they only had to worry about air pollution and no longer dust pollution, but that's a separate story.
Great, awesome. All right, the panelists are already chatting together. So please, let's thank the panelists for the great answers.